Well, everybody, it looks like we might have another dying game on our hands, and it's one of those things where I think this is worth talking about because we can learn. As an industry, we can learn. We can understand what sorts of games can actually get cut through, and when we're trying to make new games, do we try to directly compete with a very strong incumbent, or do we try to compete by doing something that's altogether new and different that could maybe expand the market in a different direction and take people away? And look, we all know the idea of live service games trying to take on an incumbent and seemingly failing is a little bit of a theme right now. I mean, last week we talked about Concord, right? This week, though, we're talking about our friends over at Ubisoft. What they tried to do, right, is they tried to take on Call of Duty with a free-to-play game called xDefiant. But xDefiant, you see, it was trying to position itself as Call of Duty for the people who really like Call of Duty, who don't want skill-based matchmaking. Now, this game exploded with 8 million players on launch, which, is a few more than Concord. But even though it had a strong launch, that is not how things are today. Insider gaming sources are reporting that this game's situation is actually grim as hell, to the point where it may even be on the chopping block. And look, in order to not be in the chopping block, and to still talk about loads of games, we run Bellular.games. That's our actual site on the internet, right? It's the best way you can support us, and we publish so much content there. Recently, right, a dive into September's upcoming games, as well as many editions of Loading Screen that most of you haven't checked out. Loading Screen is our daily newsletter, and honestly, it slaps. The team does an amazing job, and in the last edition, we dove into the indie game death cycle, because it turns out business is damn hard. And that's why, honestly, screw algorithms. I'm here to build something strong for the long run. If you would like to support us and get a load of content, check out the links down below. And with that said, let's talk about the player drop. This is one that starts with a quote, and the quote is, "If the game isn't for you, that's okay, you can move on." That was said by Mark Rubin. Now, Mark Rubin is quite a name from Call of Duty land, and he's basically the face of xDefiant. And look, whenever somebody says that, often I kind of think, okay, you know what, I can respect the honesty. You're saying, listen, this is the way we're designing our game. It's not meant to be for everybody. If you don't like it, you can play other games. I kind of like that energy. But you know what? I have a feeling that Ubisoft executives won't really love it right now. So as we know, xDefiant had over 8 million players in its first week of release. That was at the end of May. Of course, it was a free-to-play game. It was on so many different platforms. But now, things are different. We're in the final weeks of its first season, and things do not look promising, as revealed by a report published by Insider Gaming. I'm going to quote from their piece. "Internally, optimism for the game has shifted primarily due to the game's continuously declining player numbers and lack of player spending. One source told me the game had been struggling to obtain 20,000 concurrent players across all its platforms, whereas another said, quote, they, Ubisoft, would probably be happy with that number, suggesting that it's now much lower." Okay, that is from Insider Gaming's piece. The idea that it's now much lower than 20,000 again for a free-to-play game is really quite brutal. Now, of course, drops in a live service game's player numbers are completely natural, they're completely healthy, nobody is ever going to be able to sustain their launch. There are, however, a very limited few who can get to the upper echelon, and those are the games that become a part of our culture. In a way, they become a part of human culture. I'm talking about Valorant, I'm talking about CS, I'm talking about Call of Duty, where they're incumbents. They are games that either, grow over time, which is a pretty incredible thing in today's market. They either grow over their time, or they just sort of stay about the same or slowly diminish, like, say, Apex has been doing, but still with very healthy numbers. The thing is, while that's what we all know about because we're so used to seeing it, because they are the incumbents, they do have the big numbers, that is not the case for the vast majority of games. And of course, that waxing and waning can be especially steep with free-to-play games because, everyone's willing to try out something new, something topical, and something free. I hopped into xDefiant in day one because I wanted to see what the hell was going on. Well, I counted as one of those 8 million. I certainly don't count as a concurrent player now. But the thing is, I was realistically never going to be a long-term player of that game. I was just checking it out of a little bit of curiosity to see if they shook up the formula. And that's the challenge. If you're Ubisoft, you boast about your 8 million, you're happy about your great numbers, but what if it turns out that that's just some people seeing what's up, but not really in a serious manner? Because again, it's free to play. They've made no commitment. Now, provided you're not Apex or Valorant, the idea generally is you do lose loads of players, but you settle in on a sustainable sustainable floor of players that can maybe stay relatively consistent, and then over time, you can nudge that up and up and up and up. So the basic business model is you take your consistent amount of players, you work out how much they're spending, and then you try to turn a profit in that. Thing is though, even a little bit of profit is not really going to be enough. It has got to be large, and the reason, opportunity cost. In a case like this, game developers are hard to come by, so from the perspective of an executive, they could see a game ticking over, having a little bit of profit, and they could just think, well, we could redeploy these people onto something else and we'll earn more money. At best, that's a smart business decision. At worst, it's the old fallacy of the grass always being greener at the other side of the fence. And so with a competitive game like this, you need three things. You need a player base large enough to self-sustain competitive play over time. You need a percentage of that player base willing to spend money on your free-to-play game, and you need ongoing updates to basically validate both of those things in order to attract and re-attract players and get people to spend more money on new cosmetics. It's a balancing act, and apparently it's one that this game is basically not doing well in. So the notion of Ubisoft being happy with 20k concurrence across all platforms, to many of us does sound a little bit insane, a little bit crazy. This is a game that was benchmarked against Call of Duty, that was at least trying to take a slice of its pie. But to invert things, this is not a battle royale that needs 100 players a server. No, an individual match is 6v6 or 4v4 for ranked. So you know what, from a player's perspective, if you have 20,000 concurrence, that's going to feel healthy. You're always going to find a match. You're not going to have the sorts of problems that, say, Concord players are having right now. If you're a Concord player on PC, good luck finding a match. And the fact is, there are many live service games that do tick over at about 20k concurrence. Examples include Helldivers 2, Street Fighter 6, Lost Ark, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Now, some of those are of course free to play, but there is a bit of a difference between them and xDefiant, and that is, I just talked about the Steam numbers, and for those games, Steam is not their only platform, even though obviously on PC, Steam is the platform. Here's the challenge for Ubisoft. xDefiant is not hitting 20,000 players, and it's not managing to do that across PC and console combined, put together. And that's really where the second part of the problem is. And so with that grim reality covered, we've now got to talk about the other thing that this game is struggling with, and that is the amount of money that people are spending. The relative percentage of spenders could have stayed the same, but the whole population could have dropped. I mean, Ubisoft has just got the whole standard free-to-play suite of options, right? You can get a starter pack, you can get coins, you can get seasonal content, and all of that stuff, right? It's got all of the monetization, all the consumption opportunities that an enterprising free-to-play gamer could enjoy. There is, of course, a battle pass with 90 tiers, and being an Ubisoft game, do you want some of the Rainbow Six Siege-inspired people that were added in Season 1? You can do that. Do you want Sam Fisher's mates? You can do that. So this is a game that already is a soup of Ubisoft brand properties, and that actually does mean that in a way the game itself has got little of its own core identity. It's just Ubi stuff. And so I have a feeling that means that battle passes for progression were probably the main draw here. But seemingly per Insider Gaming, people are not actually buying these enough. And that means the investment in the game is not really being justified. And for a live service game like this, there's just not really many options once that threshold gets breached. And we've seen this in other games. A brilliant example is Apex Legends. Its numbers started to drop. And when that happened, the monetization really turned up. In appeared Cloud with his big buster sword that you could basically gacha your way to. And so with Apex, we have a situation where things were dropping, but they were not cratering, and they still had, in absolute terms, hundreds of thousands of concurrent players, and they were making plenty of money. EA obviously just wanted more, so that's the sort of thing that they did. What about Ubisoft? Well, according to Insider Gaming's report, Ubisoft are losing patience here. There have been 45 layoffs across the North American offices, and that has included 10 that were staff actively working in xDefiant. Now, you could maybe find ways of fixing the problem without spending money. I think the obvious one is a Steam release. Look, if you did a Steam release for this, which is a free-to-play game, Steam just has so much traffic, I think you would at least juice up your concurrent numbers quite a bit. More potential players, but I suppose it does have the downside of giving a Steam number. And for a game like Concord, the Steam number can be a problem because it erodes confidence. People report the Steam number, and that means no one will buy the game. You would be absolutely insane, out of your mind, to buy Concord when it has 150 concurrent players. And I say that as somebody who purchased Lawbreakers, and I remember sitting there, 150 concurrent players, I was one of them, waiting minutes and minutes and minutes for a match. And ultimately, that is something that just went to zero because it was fundamentally unsustainable. Now, I don't think that that'll happen with xDefiant because it is a free-to-play game, but that certainly is a risk that they could run. Now, the idea of an Ubisoft game coming to Steam about 6 months after launch is not insane, because that's happened with Skull and Bones, the Avatar game, Prince of Persia: Lost Crown, and plenty of others. But here's the thing, and it's a bad thing for xDefiant. If you want a bit of a Far Cry-like experience with the Avatar world, well, there's only really one game you can get that with. For other people who just want to go about a pretty big budget Star Wars world and enjoy things, that actually is an experience that, well, one of the few places they can get it is Star Wars Outlaws. With xDefiant, that ain't the case. So xDefiant is a first-person arcade-style shooter built around 6v6 gunplay. It was taking on Call of Duty, and the big thing that was talked about was no skill-based matchmaking. For a lot of people, they find that the skill-based matchmaking is so tight that it always is a even, well-balanced match. And in a way you might think, but Michael, that sounds like a great thing. The problem essentially was that it increased sweatiness at certain levels of gameplay, and you can see how that makes sense. If every match is perfectly balanced, then you're going to have to fight hard for every win. No more of the days where, I remember hopping into Black Ops 1 and, getting like 50 kills and 2 deaths on the firing range map. That's just not the sort of experience you're having as much in these games anymore. But here's the thing, and it is a bit of a challenge because, look, I can say I enjoyed going like 50-3. That was great fun. Was it necessarily fun for everybody else in the game? Well, that could be a bit of an issue, especially when they are just getting chopper gunnered by me. Not to toot my horn too much, of course, but here's the thing with skill-based matchmaking. It's one of those situations where a lot of people are frustrated by it, and I totally understand it. And honestly, I have felt the downsides of skill-based matchmaking when it's calibrated to be too tight. However, a lot of companies do find when they actually look at their data that the skill-based matchmaking does increase retention rates for the game. Now, I'm not saying that xDefiant was entirely sold on skill-based matchmaking isn't there in certain modes, therefore it's going to defeat Call of Duty, but it certainly is something that the game was actively using as a wedge issue to try and peel away some of the Call of Duty player base. The other thing is it appeared they had timing on their side. You see, Call of Duty's core multiplayer experience is not free to play, and during, say, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, there were significant player concerns and complaints about what the multiplayer was like. Now, even though Modern Warfare 3 is Call of Duty has issues, come on. There are a lot of core playability things that it does seem that they have calibrated better for their audience. And that means that the opportunity of a weak Call of Duty with a particularly angry player base, that has kind of passed xDefiant by. You see, xDefiant was supposed to come out way earlier, but it missed its window. It had multiple delays, and that meant that it couldn't capitalize on the discontent of the Call of Duty audience. And so that leaves it in a really rough position. As an example, the xDefiant developers have spent a lot of the preseason and the first season talking about improving their movement, fixing netcode, right? Just doing things to make sure they're in line with player expectations, responding to feedback, and some of this has been fairly impressive. This has not really been a case of developers just not listening to their players. I genuinely think that they have tried super hard, and I think they really do want to succeed and they do want to learn. As an example, there were complaints about progression for weapon masteries. They just halved that. But the problem is, a lot of that friction was there at launch. They lost their concurrency, and now, allegedly, Ubisoft are giving them until November to turn things around, so let's talk about the future. According to the report, Season 3 is the make or break for ongoing development of this game. They have to improve their player numbers or Ubisoft will cut support. And that is something that should feel quite similar, because we've been here 3 years ago. Do you remember Hyperscape? Hyperscape was a game that was just perfectly from the era of Ubisoft, looking at an emerging gameplay genre and thinking, aha! We want one of those. So Hyperscape was Ubisoft's battle royale genre entry. Its big selling point was really good movement, but it just failed to match some of its competition, and after 3 seasons, it was killed. And this is something we've seen again and again from Ubisoft. They just have this pipeline where they seem to start development on a genre entry. Usually they connect that to, Tom Clancy or something. As an example, xDefiant was a fully Tom Clancy experience to begin with. So they would do that, and if they think there's an audience for the game, they'll end up publishing it, and if they don't, they cancel it. A good example of that is The Division Heartland, and there's other things they've cancelled as well. But anyway, if they think there's an audience, the game comes out, and then they need to see if the game hits a critical mass of sustainability. And for Ubisoft, that's not an impossible thing. Here's like 2 really good examples: Brawlhalla and For Honor. Do you know what they have? consistent enough audiences, they get updates, and they're just stable and happy. But of course, it's not always the case, as with Hyperscape. So here, Season 3 is their final chance. I would imagine their final chance to get their unit economics right. If they can get their unit economics right, then perhaps Ubisoft will say, okay, this is not going to be our next big Call of Duty, but maybe we can cost control that team and we can get something that is smaller, but still sustainable, that perhaps we can grow over time. As it stands right now, though, that is no sure thing, and Season 3 is the make or break. The challenge, though, is if the timelines stay the same as they've been, Season 3 will launch in November, and that is when Call of Duty ramps up into its post-launch seasonal content, and it's Black Ops. And as much as Modern Warfare may be the thing that I would remember the most from when I was growing up, Black Ops has had a consistent ability to draw audiences, and unlike some previous Black Ops entries, like I think it was 4 had no campaign, and it certainly had quite a lot of drama around its monetization. 5, called Black Ops Cold War, that was a bit of a challenging game where they really just had to, basically, Treyarch had to pull that game out of a hat, and it was impressive that they did, but, it wasn't perfect. In this case, though, it certainly is being positioned as a big, proper, full-fat Black Ops experience. This is not one of those semi-skimmed Black Ops experiences we had in the past. So that is the biggest sub-label of Call of Duty, and the 3rd season of xDefiant will have to compete with the seasonal content of it, which, to be honest, makes me think that Ubisoft are setting it up for death. I mean, I understand Ubisoft saying, listen, we can only put money into this for so long, we need a return. But setting your expiry date to coincide with Black Ops 6? Man, that seems like a risky proposition to me. And so we sort of see it happening again. We saw it last week with Concord, a game that was very much an entry in a genre. Failed to get cut through. Of course, $40 definitely holding it back. Here we see another game, an entry in a genre, has managed to find an audience, but an audience that seems to be too small. I mean, 20k? Again, a source said that Ubisoft would be happy with 20k. Maybe that means it's 10k now. Maybe it means it's 5k. We just don't know because we don't have Uplay info. Point is, though, it's almost certainly grim. And I guess when I think about the sorts of games that really explode and get out there, I end up thinking of not indie teams, because they are sort of big, impressive games, but so many big gaming experiences. I don't want to say they've been accidents, but they've been unique-ish, fresh-ish things that have just taken off virally by themselves, like PUBG. PUBG's a great example of that. And yeah, there were PUBG-style games beforehand, like the original mod, but that just exploded. Take Tarkov and the extraction shooter, and there's plenty of other things trying to be extraction shooters, but if you want to get a part of that market, I mean, I think about The Hunt. The Hunt is actually doing really well right now. The Hunt is that extraction-style gameplay, but it's a pretty damn different spin on it. Take Naraka Bladepoint. Yeah, that's a battle royale game, but guess what? It's pretty different to PUBG. Fortnite is also pretty different to PUBG. So even though battle royales, they're there, they exist, they're a thing, they do feel like, when you look at the market incumbents that have just settled in, they do just feel very meaningfully different. Whereas when you compare xDefiant and Call of Duty, there's quite a lot of similarity. One of the points of difference is the Ubisoft brands, but you know what? Whenever I hopped into xDefiant and there was fire stuff coming from the Division dudes, that was just annoying. And I don't really have that much of a connection to the Division. I don't know. It seems kind of rough. I would love to know what your take on this is, though. And if you'd like way more content from us, including our videos early and ad-free, loading screen published daily, and access to all of our reports and our members' Discord, hit up bellular.games. It is the best way to support what we do. And over there, I'm trying to build a proper, sustainable home for the future, so we're not having to rely on AdSense and algorithms. Okay, have a brilliant day. Check out this video next.